Now let us solve some FMG questions. Okay, so the first question here is, a 54-year-old female has amenorrhea since 16 months. Okay, absence of menses since 16 months. What would be the hormone levels? Okay, so what we are talking about here is that this is a female who is in the menopausal age group, right? And then she has had amenorrhea since 16 months. So, absence of menses in menopausal age group for more than 12 months, okay? If the patient has not had cycles, the menstrual cycles in 12 months or more than that, then we call it menopause, okay? So, they are asking here the hormone levels that are seen in that time. Okay, so to understand this question, you should first know how this all happens. It is GnRH, okay, GnRH is also called, the full form of which is gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay, now this is produced by hypothalamus. Okay, and then we have gonadotropins. So these are the terminologies basically which you should know. Gonadotropins are FSH and LH, okay, follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. FSH and LH are produced by anterior pituitary. Okay, why I am telling you this is because I want you to understand the entire hormonal profile so that you are able to answer such questions. Okay, so GnRH is gonadotropin releasing hormone produced by hypothalamus, and GN means gonadotropins. Okay, so this is the hypothalamus. Basically, hypothalamus and pituitary, these are the central systems. Okay, ovary is peripheral system. So this is hypothalamus. There we have arcuate nuclei. Okay, and then we have this pituitary. Okay, so GnRH is released from hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus releases GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and as the name suggests, gonadotropin releasing hormone releases gonadotropins. Gonadotropins are FSH and LH. Okay, it releases hormone. So the pulsatile release of GnRH sends signal to the anterior pituitary, to release gonadotropins. Okay, now what does this pituitary do? This pituitary then sends signal to ovary. Okay, it then sends signal to ovary. Ovary gets these signals to produce estrogen and progesterone, right? This estrogen and progesterone then acts on the uterus, the uterine lining, basically to cause proliferation and certain changes in the uterus so that menses can occur. Okay, so that the patient bleeds. Now, anything in this whole system, if there's any problem, then it may lead to amenorrhea. Okay, so we need an intact HPO, hypothalamo-pituitary ovarian endometrial axis, okay, basically to function well. Now, if suppose here before this, if there is a problem, okay, before this, what is it? It is estrogen and progesterone which is leading to all the changes causing menstrual cycle. Now, if there is no estrogen and progesterone, why would there not be any estrogen and progesterone? If the ovary is not producing estrogen or progesterone. What is ovary? Ovary is gonad. Okay, ovary is a gonad, right? So, if there is hypogonadism, okay, so that estrogen and progesterone is not produced, then the menses will not occur. Now, this hypogonadism can be because of the fault in ovary, or the fault in the center, that the hypothalamus or pituitary may not be producing enough hormones. So you remember it like that. The hypothalamus and pituitary, they are employers, okay, and the ovary is their employee. If the employee is not working well, then the employer will send signals, right, for the ovary to function well, okay. So if the ovary is at fault, if hypogonadism is due to the fault of the ovary, then the gonadotropins will be high in order to cause ovary to produce estrogen and progesterone. That is called as hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. Okay, so when there is a fault in the ovary, then we call it hypergonadotropic hypogonadism, and in this scenario the E2 will be low because the ovary is not functioning, but the FSH will be high and the LH will be high, okay, in order to make the ovary function, but the ovary has gone bad, it is not functioning. That is hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. Another scenario is if the hypogonadism is due to central cause, okay, the gonadotropins are not enough, there is some central problem, okay, then that is called as hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. So that is hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. Now it is due to central cause, okay, it is due to central cause, some problem with the hypothalamus or the pituitary. So what will happen here? The ovary is not functioning, E2 is less, but that is because the employer is basically not functioning, okay. FSH will also be low in this and LH will also be low in this, okay. So hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, and this is hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. I hope this is clear here. Anything, if there is any problem beyond this, okay, if there is some obstruction here, okay, some obstruction here, there is some obstruction, everything is working well, the hormones are fine, the ovary is working fine, even the blood is there, but it is not coming out, the outlet is bad, okay, it can be due to obstruction. The obstructive cause will cause what? It will cause eugonadotropic eugonadism. Okay, eugonadotropic eugonadism in obstruction, or if the uterus is not functioning well, if there is obstruction, then the E2 is normal, the FSH is normal, and LH is also normal. Okay, this is called as eugonadotropic eugonadism. Now going back to our question, now what is the problem here? Here, this is a menopausal age group female. Here, her ovarian reserve is gone. Her ovaries are bad. Ovaries are not working well. So, what will be the picture here? It will be the picture of this, okay, bad ovary, right? So, hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. Here, the FSH will be high and LH will be high. Okay? Now, moving on to the next question. A 14-year-old girl with cyclical pain in abdomen has not yet attained menarche and presents with following image. Okay, what is the diagnosis? Alright, is it hemorrhagic cyst, imperforate hymen, transverse vaginal septum, or endometriosis? So what is given here is that the labia is being separated and you can see a bulging membrane, okay, a bulging membrane. So the answer is imperforate hymen. What do you see in imperforate hymen? In imperforate hymen, see, it is a type of obstructive amenorrhea, right? There is obstruction. So this would be eugonadotropic eugonadism. Here there is obstruction. The hymen has not, there is no perforation in the hymen. So that is the obstruction at the level of introitus. You just separate the labia and you can see a bluish bulging membrane. So sometimes they ask you this, a bluish bulge is seen, okay, bluish bulging membrane, okay, bulging membrane at the introitus is seen, okay. Here the patient has, because the blood is there but it is not coming out. So with every cycle there is pain but there is no bleeding. So patient has cyclical pain. Patient has amenorrhea. So there is primary amenorrhea with cyclical pain in abdomen. Okay, with cyclical pain. So these are all questions. Okay, and what do you do in this case? You cut it, right? You just need to cut the membrane. Okay, so you made a cruciate incision. Okay, you make a cruciate incision and then drain it. Okay, and then she'll be fine. So the answer here, with bluish bulging membrane at the introitus, the answer is imperforate hymen. Now, why is it not other? See, hemorrhagic cyst is seen in ovary. So that is out of the question. Endometriosis, first of all, does not really lead to primary amenorrhea, although there is cyclical pain that is there. But just looking at separating the introitus, it can't be seen. Okay, endometriosis is not there. A very close differential is transverse vaginal septum. But with transverse vaginal septum, the level of obstruction is high. Okay. So for imperforate hymen, if the level of obstruction, if this is the uterus and this is the cervix, this is the vagina, this is the level of obstruction. Okay, so there is a bulge which can be seen outside, but with the transverse vaginal septum, the level of obstruction is high. This is the vagina, this is the cervix, right? So the obstruction is here. So from outside you can't see because the septum is above, way above. Okay. So the difference between the two is that imperforate hymen can be seen from outside with a bluish bulge, and transverse vaginal septum can't be seen because the septum is high up. Most commonly it is at the level of os. Okay, external os. Now, what is the first sign of magnesium toxicity? Is it respiratory depression, loss of patellar reflex, cardiac arrest, or absent urine output? See, magnesium sulfate is the drug of choice for prevention and treatment of eclampsia. Okay, so it has a therapeutic level. Okay, the therapeutic level of magnesium sulfate is 4 to 7 milliequivalents per liter. Okay, and with increasing levels, there is toxicity that can be seen as this. With whenever it is more than 8, okay, more than 8 leads to loss of knee jerk, loss of patellar reflex. Okay, then more than 8 leads to loss of patellar reflex. At 12, you have respiratory insufficiency. At 15, you have respiratory arrest. And at more than 30, you have cardiac arrest. Okay, so this is what is seen. So knee jerk, absent knee jerk is the first sign of magnesium sulfate toxicity. So whenever we give magnesium sulfate to a patient, we make a chart. Okay, we make a chart, and 4-hourly we see her knee jerk, we measure the urine output, and then we measure the respiratory rate. And after checking every 4 hours, this is what we do practically. After every 4 hours, when you have to give Maxil the next dose by Pritchard regime, you check her knee jerk. If knee jerk is present, okay, fine, because that is the first to go, then you administer. Okay, so the first to go is knee jerk reflex. That is the first sign of magnesium toxicity. And what is the antidote of magnesium toxicity? It is calcium gluconate. Calcium gluconate is the antidote of magnesium toxicity. Okay, so the next question, a 23-year-old presents with postcoital bleeding. On per-speculum examination, you see following picture. What is your probable diagnosis? Is it cervical fibroid? Is it cervical carcinoma, cervical polyp, or cervical atrophy? So whenever you see a question, you have to see it in total. What other explanation is given? Postcoital bleeding, yeah, it is there. But look at the age of the patient. First of all, the patient is so young, 23-year-old. Okay. Now, on per-speculum examination, if you can appreciate, you can see a very small bulge basically coming out from the os. Okay, the external area looks fine. Okay, answer here is cervical polyp. Okay, why is it not the other three? So let us go one by one. Cervical cancer looks something like this. So it is a cauliflower-like growth, and cervical cancer starts in the transformation zone. So it will not be a picture where the ectocervix is perfectly fine, because squamous cell carcinoma is the most common type of cervical carcinoma, right? And it starts in the ectocervix. So the ectocervix will be eaten up, okay? It will be either eaten up or there will be cauliflower-like growth. Okay, but here we can see that there is something coming out from the internal os. Okay, so it is something like this. This is the cervix, okay, and here is the polyp, and this is how it is coming out, and this is what can be seen on transverse section. It is like this, right? So it is not cervical cancer, and on top of that, she is a young female, right? So that makes carcinoma less likely. Then cervical fibroid, it is not cervical fibroid, because cervical fibroid actually leads to the hypertrophy of the cervix, and it generally does not lead to postcoital bleeding. Postcoital bleeding is a symptom of carcinoma and polyp. Cervical atrophy, again, why would there be atrophy in a young girl, right? And it does not look like an atrophic picture. There is a clear-cut structure coming out from the os. Okay. Now, also in cervical fibroid, there is a typical presentation that is also asked in question: lantern on the dome of St. Peter's appearance. So that is the appearance of cervical fibroid on the specimen that you take out. Now, okay, this is a very important question. Identify the following maneuver. They ask you image-based questions very frequently now. Is it Leopold maneuver 1, 2, 3 or 4? See, these Leopold maneuvers are basically to identify the position, the lie of fetus in the maternal pelvis, okay, the maternal abdomen. Alright, so the longitudinal lie or transverse lie, that all sometimes you can make out if there is an oval bulge of the abdomen, right? So, but where are the parts located? Whether it is a fundal, it is a cephalic presentation or a breech presentation, where are the limbs, where is the back? So, basically that all is identified by Leopold's maneuver. So, Leopold maneuver 1, this is Leopold maneuver 1, okay. In Leopold maneuver 1, what do? This is the fundus, okay. So here this is patient's head, okay, and this side is patient's feet, okay. You look at patient's side, if you can appreciate, if the examiner has to do something like this, what is seen in 1, then the examiner will have to stand on the right side of the patient and face the patient, right? Only then you can actually palpate. You palpate the fundal side, right? The fundal grip. It is called as fundal grip to see what is the presenting part. If it is a hard, globular, ballotable part, then that is suggestive of head. And contrary to that, if it is a broad, irregular part, then that is breech. That is suggestive of breech. Okay. So that is the fundal grip, which is called as Leopold maneuver number 1. What is Leopold maneuver 2? It is the lateral grip, okay, laterally. You see laterally what is the part in the right lateral part and what part of fetus is there in the left lateral part. If you see a round, hard, curvy linear structure, then that is suggestive of fetal spine. If you feel multiple knobby parts, if multiple knobby parts can be felt, that is fetal limb. Okay. So, if you can see here, this is the round, curvy, linear part. Okay. And there are multiple knobby parts. So, this lateral grip is Leopold maneuver 2. Now, Leopold maneuver number 3, in this, you try to hold the presenting part, the part that is there in the pelvis. Okay, you try to hold that part and feel what kind of a part is that. If it is a hard globular part which may be ballotable, then that is head. If it is a broad irregular part, that is breech. Okay, so you can see that if the baby is lying like this, then the presentation here, this is breech, right? So this is what can be felt. So on fundal grip, if you feel head, on pelvic grip, you will feel breech. okay, and vice versa. This is 3. Okay, this is Leopold number 3, which is also called as Pavlik grip. Okay, it's also called as Pavlik grip. Okay, as you can see in all these cases, the examiner is facing the head of the patient, right? And then 4th grip, Leopold 4, is the grip where you try to reach below the presenting part. Okay, you try to reach below the presenting part and you see if the presenting part is engaged or not. What does engagement mean? Whether it has crossed the pelvic brim. Okay, whether it has descended and crossed the pelvic brim. See, you can use your imagination. If the head is deep down inside, then if you try to converge your fingers below that presenting part, you will not be able to converge it, right? And if the head is way up, it has not engaged, then you will be able to converge your fingers, right? So if you can converge, if the hand is converging, then it is not engaged. Okay, the head is not engaged. And if it is diverging, then it is engaged. And as you can see here, all these 3, first, second, third, were facing the patient, and the 4th grip, if you have to do it like this, you will have to stand with your back on patient's head, right? So in that you face against the patient and you face patient's feet, and they can ask this question as well. Okay, so 4th pelvic grip, you face the feet of the patient, and that is to identify whether the presenting part has engaged or not. Okay, so what is the answer to this question? We can see that it is the pelvis. You're trying to feel what is the presenting part. So the answer here is 3. Okay, it is Leopold maneuver 3. If the fetus is in transverse lie, if this is the maternal abdomen and the fetus is like this, is in transverse lie, then the pelvic grip will be empty. This is also one question. In transverse lie, the pelvic grip will be empty. There is no part to hold. No? The fetus is in transverse lie. Alright. So this is Leopold maneuver. Now, few images. What is this? This is an ultrasound and you can see multiple black dots. This they have asked a lot of times. This is called as snowstorm appearance. Okay, this is snowstorm appearance. Where is it seen? It is seen in molar pregnancy. It is seen in hydatidiform mole. Okay, incomplete molar pregnancy. Then they ask you, they can give you options like what is true about the condition where this picture is seen. So that is how they try to combine 2 or 3 questions and to test your knowledge. So snowstorm appearance on ultrasound is seen on molar pregnancy. In molar pregnancy, the uterus can be slightly more than period of gestation. There are grape-like vesicles that can be seen. And in this pregnancy, you do suction and evacuation to remove the products. And here beta HCG, follow up with beta HCG is very important. Okay. Okay. So snowstorm appearance is seen in molar pregnancy. Then what is this? This is one condition which is very common, right? This is polycystic ovary. Okay, polycystic ovary. In polycystic ovary, as you can see here, multiple follicles can be seen peripherally lying the ovary. Okay, so it gives a pearls in necklace appearance. Okay, peripherally lined follicles. Okay, so this is polycystic ovary, which can be seen in polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. So it is one of the Rotterdam criteria to diagnose PCOS. What are the other criteria? There are 3 criteria. There should be 2 present for us to label the patient as PCOS. First is presence of menstrual abnormality. So there should be oligo or anovulation. Okay, delayed periods. So that is first. Second is presence of hyperandrogenism, either biochemical hyperandrogenism, that is high testosterone, or the clinical hyperandrogenism, where you see excessive hair growth, hirsutism is seen. So that these are the two criteria. The third criteria is presence of polycystic ovary. If more than 12 follicles are seen in one ovary, or the ovarian size is more than 10 cc, then it is called as polycystic ovary. Okay, so in Rotterdam criteria there are three criteria, 1, 2 and 3. First is oligo or anovulation. Okay, so the menstrual abnormality. Second is hyperandrogenism, either the biochemical or clinical evidence. And third is polycystic ovary, more than 12 follicles peripherally arranged. Okay, peripherally arranged like this. And you need only 2 out of 3. Okay, only 2 out of 3 to label the patient as polycystic ovarian syndrome. And PCOS is a very, very important topic. So, thank you.